Hi there, welcome to Reflections, a program sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry. I'm Heidi Suhrheinrich. I'm one of your hosts today, and with me is my friend Scott Dossett. Hi, Scott.
Good morning, Heidi.
You doing all right?
I'm doing well.
Super.
Good.
Who have we got today?
Well, today we wanted to talk a little bit about the question of how we can do interfaith dialogue, and obviously we're going to be coming from the perspective of a Christian perspective.
Today?
We have a couple of folks, pastors of local churches. We have Jay Gottman from First Christian Church.
Yes.
You want to share a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from?
Sure. My name's Jay Gottman. I'm from First Christian Church here in Paducah at 415 Audubon Drive, and I'm the lead minister there. And I've been pastoring at that church for 9.5 years now.
Wow.
So I'm excited to be here today.
Thanks for being here.
Great.
Thank you.
We also have Brandt Lyon from 12 Oaks. You want to share a little bit?
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm Brandt Lyon. I'm pastor there at 12 Oaks. Been there for about 2.5 years and enjoying it very much.
Awesome. Well, terrific. So we will be coming from the Christian perspective, but we wanted to talk a little bit about how, as Christians, we can and should relate to other faiths. We live in a world now that is much smaller than it used to be. Globalization and technology have brought us much closer together than I would say any time in human history. And now we have this one place where we're all together, and we have to learn to talk, and we have to learn to communicate and partner together in ways that will benefit our individual communities.
Sure.
So why don't we start off with maybe like a short answer question of what do you think it is that distinguishes Christianity from other faiths?
Short answer, he says.
Short answer.
No small task there.
I think more than anything, it's the gospel.
Okay.
I think that is what makes Christianity significantly different. The idea that a person does not have to earn their way into the favor of God, that it is something that is given by grace through faith. I think it is something that not only is it different than any other religion, I think it is something that is divine in nature. After all, as I often say to my congregation, who would have thought of that? Mm-hmm. Who would have come up with the idea that I don't have to be perfect, that I don't have to get it all right, that I am given grace by God? And so I think that is what makes us significantly different than any other religion, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree with that. Having God incarnate in Jesus is, I think, a very distinguishing mark of Christianity as a world religion. You have God being in human form, which is a little bit different than most of the world's faith traditions. There are some variations, obviously, but to have that and the grace factor as well, to know that you don't have to be perfect and that through Jesus you have this grace that is there to make up for any inadequacies we have as human beings or any sinfulness.
Any that we might happen to have.
Yeah, it kind of covers all bases for those who believe that way. And so I think that's probably the most distinguishing characteristic for me.
That's cool, that's fair. What would you say then that we have in common with other faiths? What are some of the things that Christianity can find common ground with other faiths?
I think from my perspective, I think every world religion talks about trying to perfect the human being that you are, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. It's all about doing your best in terms of living a life that is moral, ethical, righteous in some way, and many have a component of building up community and taking care of one another. So I think that's where there's a great similarity, and most of the world's religions have some form of Christianity's golden rule of to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so I think that's a powerful overarching comparison of all those faith traditions.
I tend to agree with that. I am very open to working side by side of people of any faith or no faith at all when it comes to social issues, taking care of people in our community, bettering our community. I think that's wonderful. I think, though, here we are in the middle of this postmodern, post-Christian era, and we're losing this idea of truth, of at least everyone trying to come to this place of truth. Let me give an example. I'm walking through the parking lot of Walmart, and I look over one day, and there's one of those bumper stickers that has all the different symbols of all the religions saying coexist. I think that's where I draw the line, at least philosophically. is that while I'm willing to work, and we need to come together for the betterment of the community, I think there is something to the Christian understanding of the gospel that it is exclusive. It is something that is either truth or it's not. And I think that's where I would generally draw the line when it comes to things of salvation, spiritual growth, those kind of things. That might be where I draw the line. But as far as the social issues and things like that, I think we stand shoulder to shoulder quite often.
Well,
Go ahead.
so I was just going to say, well, of course, Paducah Cooperative Ministry is an interfaith ministry, and that's the one thing that does bring us together in unity.
That's right.
Is responding in a unified way to the needs of our community for the betterment of the community, and finding that as one place we can stand together and start that dialogue.
That's right.
And certainly truth is, I suspect every faith tradition would speak of the truths of their tradition, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky, doesn't it?
Sure it does.
In trying to bring those understood truths together in a way that we can move forward.
And I think I come at it from a different perspective in that I believe that Christianity and following Jesus and the teachings of the gospel are my path, my truth, my understanding of the world. And at the same time, I look at other faith traditions and say they have their truth. And so I've chosen my path, and I think that's the right one for me, while at the same time I feel like I'm inclusive, or want to be inclusive, to say I don't have all the answers, and God may have set up all this, or a higher power may have set up all this, and everyone's working toward, I think, an ultimate goal, and Christianity happens to be how I'm choosing to work through that path. And so that's the perspective I take on it. And so it's a little bit different, but it is one that speaks to me, and I think it's still faithful to Christianity in that I'm following a prescribed way of being because I believe it's the right one for me.
It's an interesting discussion. I think what I hear when I hear people talk about these things is a shade of different understanding about truth. What exactly truth is. There is some view of truth that there is perhaps many absolute truths, and we're pursuing all those absolute truths. And then at the same time, there's a view that says, well, maybe there are shades of truth, and we are approaching ultimately a goal of absolute truth. But as we get there, we have to realize maybe that there are different shades that we progress as we go along, or maybe we come from different perspectives and we're all aiming at the same thing. I'm not sure exactly how that works out for you guys, but let's deal with the issue of exclusivism. We've got it on the table. We might as well go at it, right? We have a lot of different faiths that come together, and they worship, and they have different deities, they have different gods. And all of those tend to have some focus on the afterlife. What happens after we die? Are we reincarnated? Do we go to heaven, or do we go to hell? And with Christianity, of course, most people in Christianity would tend to say it is a discussion of heaven or hell. And that can get awkward. Would you say that can get awkward when you're discussing with other faiths? So how do you approach that question of, someone comes up to you and says, hey, you're a Christian, do you think I'm going to heaven or hell? And they're from another faith. How do you approach that?
And I get that question all the time. Well, I think that, again, there has to be some understanding of what truth is. And let me flesh it out this way. I do believe that when we stand before God, He's not going to go, I had 100 different truths. You just choose one. And again, I don't mean to be offensive in the way I say that. I think God has a particular way of salvation, which, if we take the historical truth of Christ, what we do see in history is a man who made certain claims of salvation that was going to be based upon his death, burial, and resurrection. We see it happen after his prophecy of it. What do you do with that guy? And of course, you get into the whole issue of John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And here's the thing, if God would go through such great lengths to offer us a salvation based on the blood of His own Son, I personally would be fearful of saying, but there's lots of other ways. Because that's a pretty distinct way of salvation. That is a pretty pretty difficult way of salvation, it would seem to me. And of course, it does seem to me, at least, that Jesus was very exclusive by that statement alone, that he is very exclusive in his way of salvation. So I want to be very, very careful. Now, as I say that, I want to be very careful when I'm dealing with someone of a different faith. I don't want to look at them necessarily and go, well, you're just dead wrong and you're going to hell over it. I don't think that's the right path either. But I think on some level, we ought to be able to have the discussion based on some reference point of truth and trying to decide what that reference point of truth is. For me, it is the resurrection.
Okay. How would you respond?
Sure, and I think I take it one step higher. I go to there is some supreme power of the universe. I choose to call that God. If you're Hindu, it's moksha, it's a liberation from all that this world puts upon you. If you're Buddhist, it's nirvana. For Muslims, it's paradise, which sounds very much like our Christian understanding of heaven. And so I take it one step further and say that there is this God that offers truths that allow people to experience the fullness of whatever that supreme reality is. And again, my understanding from a Christian perspective is, yes, that truth gets played out in the teachings of Jesus. And the beautiful thing for me of Christianity is those of the Jewish faith and those of the Muslim faith and other faiths look at Jesus as being a great teacher, but they don't place that divinity upon that person like those of us of a Christian faith do. Sure. And have that understanding. And so I tend to, like I say, just go one step higher because, Jews and Muslims look at Christianity and we say we're monotheistic, believe in one God, and then they go, well, you've got this person Jesus, you've got this Holy Spirit thing going on, 1, 2, that's 3. How can you be monotheists? And Jews and Muslims say, well, we only worry about God. We don't worry about the divinity of Jesus. We don't worry about the Holy Spirit. And so, those of us of the Christian faith have said, well, we understand the Trinity. We say it's all the same substance. It just gets manifested in different ways. But, the wonderment of the world is that outsiders look at us and go, that doesn't make sense to me. I can't fully understand that. And so when it comes to heaven and hell, I tend to approach it as God wants the best for us. We follow the example of Jesus in the Christian faith. And so if we're faithful to that and we do our best and God's grace is there for us through Jesus, then we experience that. And for me, hell is an existence on this plane, either of our own choosing or because of socioeconomic problems, and that we live in hell sometimes either by our own doing or just because of circumstances. And I don't believe God wants that for us. And so I take a very different approach to that. A God who's loving, caring, and generous only wants the best for us. And so why would hell ever really be a permanent solution?
So two very different perspectives.
Yeah, two very,
yes.
If
So
I
that's why I love
understand
this
correctly,
dialogue.
I know,
Yeah.
and you can just go deeper and deeper. If I understand, Jay, you're talking about many journeys or paths that reach to a common truth. Am I understanding that? Where we all arrive at the same common truth?
Exactly. For example, Hinduism, they believe that there are many different paths up the mountain to their perceived ultimate, which is liberation from this world, and they have different yogas. In Christianity, we would just call those different denominations, different ways of looking at the world. We're both Christian, however, we have different understandings of how that works.
Different interpretations.
Different interpretations. That doesn't mean that either one of us is 100% right or wrong. It just means that we have a different understanding of how to understand those scriptures that guide us, that lead us, and give us our perceived ultimate, which is heaven.
Okay, and Brandt is saying it's a little more clear cut than that. It's cut and dried. There's a line in the sand, if you will.
I think there is. One of the interesting things about that is all those religions would also claim to be exclusive. I mean, you're not going to find a Hindu going, again, and I realize there are different angles in all of them, but a pure Hindu, a pure Muslim are generally going to say we have some corner on truth here. And so there is an exclusivity in all religions to some degree, and I think we have to take that into account. Not to mention the fact that either grace is real or it's not. I think that also makes it exclusive. There has to be a way of salvation that is either based on our works or based on grace. I would find it very cruel of God to say to one group, you get grace. You, this group over here, you go work really hard and I'll let you know in the end how you do. For me, those are two very opposite polar truths. And so, and I'm using that term very lightly there, there has to be a truth in one or the other because they are polar. I think there's some logic involved there, that either there is grace that we're given or that we work our way to salvation. That's, for me, is the reason I see it as very exclusive.
You know, even within the Christian tradition, I'm aware that there are some faith traditions that this is the one true church. And other ones say, well, you don't need to go outside of our particular church.
Denomination or church.
If you go outside our church, what we believe may be watered down or maybe even perverted in some way and take you away from what you've been raised with.
That's true.
So even within the Christian denominations, there's quite a bit of disparity, if you will, as to what's correct and what's true, and that gets really tricky for maybe a non-believer that's trying to sort through, you know, where is that truth? You know, that they seem very sincere in what they say, and they seem like, you know, they know what they're talking about, and what do you do at that point? Is that where prayer comes in, or
No,
what do you do?
Again, I think it is the biblical gospel that we go back and see. What ties me together with other denominations is that gospel, the gospel of grace. And so I would have no problem saying that, okay, I share a very common faith with most Methodist churches, most, you know, Church of Christ, that center their understanding of salvation upon that gospel of grace. I think that's the center point. So often what you see in the difference of denominations is differences of form and methodology and things like that. But I find fellowship with any Christian denomination that believes in the gospel of grace. I think that's what binds us together. And so if I'm talking to that particular person, I don't necessarily think it matters so much what denomination. I think what matters is the understanding of the gospel and the claims of Christ.
That's interesting. You know, when I listen to you guys speak, I actually hear a different perspective from both of you on grace. And so I'm listening to it and I'm hearing some different understandings of what grace means. And we don't have the time to go into that, obviously, in a show that's 30 minutes long. So, but it is interesting that even among our own churches and our own denominations, as you were pointing out, Heidi, we have these barriers that come up between us. So is it reasonable? Is it even possible to think that we could have these kinds of discussions in a way that is non-coercive, that we're not trying to convince people to do things our way, that is non-threatening? Is it reasonable to believe that in a world where we're all thrust together in such a small place, that we can have a dialogue that is not ultimately either pushing,
a winner and a loser.
Yeah, a winner and a loser, or coercive and non-coercive and non-threatening? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
That's a hard question.
I think it comes down to you have to develop some kind of relationship with anyone before you can even have that dialogue, because a good example, and this is just within Christianity, I was on a mission trip recently to Moore, Oklahoma, and we had Catholics, independent Christians, Methodists, Christian Church Disciples of Christ, which is my particular Christian understanding, and Presbyterians. And we were all working in relationship. We didn't talk about theological things. But as the course of the week went on, as we got to know one another, those barriers were down to where I know you, you know me a little bit better, and we can talk about some of those things. And I value you as a human being now, so I value what you have to say. And I think that happens with other faith traditions as well. I have to get to know someone and hear what they have to say about their faith. They hear what I have to say, but that's all after some kind of human bonding has taken place.
I like that. I think
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, let me say this. I'm probably not one that's going to give up on the exclusivity of the gospel.
And
Okay, I
nobody's
think
going to
that's a
ask you
given.
to.
But let me say this: I think, Jay, I think you nailed it when you said it's got to be relational. Here's what I think we're missing. We're missing two things. One, a true search for truth. I think we tend in this culture to just give in to the fluidity of philosophy and say, well, we'll accept it all, and whatever you think's fine, whatever you think's fine. I think we really do need to get back to an idea of a true search for truth. We also are giving up on respect for people nowadays. If I don't like your truth and I can't prove you wrong, we tend to go with more emotional means, and we begin to argue and fight, and I think that's wrong too.
Yeah.
I think Jay nailed it in that I want to be respectful. Obviously, Jay and I come from totally different perspectives. I respect the fact that you think differently than I do, and that's okay. You're welcome to do that. Now, you're right. When you and I have a better relationship, we'll be able to have theological conversations. But I do think there ought to be some, I don't want to use the word argumentation, but definitely a discussion that is based on some reference point of truth. And you and I may walk away from the table going, okay, we didn't agree on that, and I respect that. But I think we ought to be searching for what is that truth. Is one of us right, or neither one of us right? There needs to be that search for what is truth.
I agree, and ultimately, I guess the question comes down to sometimes, what can that reference point be? Is that reference point, some of us have a tendency to think doctrinally. We have a tendency to think that the reference point for the truth is my understanding of salvation, or the reference point for truth is my understanding of love, or acceptance or tolerance. And then we wind up in a bind, because when we use that reference point, other people don't have the same reference for those words. So it's an interesting discussion. It's very complicated.
I like what you're both saying about the relationship, because once you establish a genuine relationship with somebody, you can have a genuine give and take. And you've got to have the give and the take back and forth to get that dialogue going, and not, simply a hard stance. We've got to be able to talk and figure out. You said something, I wanted to come back to it, and I'm going to try and figure out exactly how you said it. A true search for the truth. Is that how?
Yes.
Would you talk a little bit more about that? Because that was intriguing. I wanted to know more.
Well, let me say this. If God, and I think we would agree here on this point, that God is somewhere outside of space and time. He is the creator of space and time. If God is outside our space and time, how would we know him unless he reveals himself to us? I mean, at that point, if God never reveals himself to us, we're all just kind of blowing in the wind on who he is, what he's doing, and what he's up to. And of course, obviously, I, as an evangelical conservative Christian, I'm going to say that reference point, that revelation of God is going to be found in his word. And so that's always going to be my reference point.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult to think that God, to be exact, again, I think it would be cruel of God to have set this world in motion, walked away and said, you guys figure it out. You try to figure out who I am. So I think he did step into our space and time. I think he did interact with us in history. I think Christ is the incarnation of God, the God in the flesh who came to walk amongst us. And so when I say true search for truth, I'm talking about who is God and how did he reveal himself to us? Because there's where we're going to find who he is. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me about this idea that we're all on a different search in a different way, because it does say one of two things. Either God never interacted at all, or he interacted in lots of different ways. But there is an inconsistency, if that second be true, in how God interacted. I mean, he told the Hindus to do it in one way, the Muslims do it another way, Christians do it another way. There's an inconsistency that's very difficult for me. True search for truth for me is
that an inconsistency in the message, or how it was received, maybe?
I would say, that those interactions probably didn't happen between, again, I'm very exclusive in this. So the messages
statement.
are very, yes, it is a very bold statement. Yeah. But again, let me say this. Can I be wrong? Sure I can.
Oh, yeah.
But I want to say this. I'm also trying to go back to, okay, how did God reveal himself to me? I'm not going to figure it out on my own. I'm going to figure it out through what he revealed to me.
Yeah, and I hear that perspective, and there's part of me, and I heard part of this in what you were saying. Obviously, we don't know the mind of God, and so I just wonder how you say, God, it may be cruel to kind of leave people blowing in the wind, but I approach it that it would be cruel for God not to be accepting and inclusive of all. Because when I start to limit what God can do from my human perspective, then I wonder what that says about God. I wonder what that says about me. And so that's why I come at it from a different, what if I am wrong? Yeah. I believe that the God that I believe in and worship will be accepting of me if I've been wrong. Mm-hmm. So how can I be judgmental against someone who has a different viewpoint or a completely different faith than me? And so that's where I come from.
That's one of the things I want to be very, very careful about, because oftentimes conservative evangelicals are accused of that, and in many ways, rightfully so. We can be very judgmental. I want to admit that. At the same time, there's a fine line there of, I don't want to be judgmental. I want to show the same grace to a person of a different faith that Christ showed me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I want to give up on what I believe to be the truth and that exclusivity of the gospel, but it does mean that I very compassionately want to share the hope of the gospel with someone who might not believe like I do. And if they choose to reject it, I want to walk away respectfully. Sure. But at the same time, I want that. I want the privilege, the freedom to be able to share that with another person. Absolutely. As an exclusive truth that I believe is revealed in history and in Scripture.
Yeah, well, Brandt and Jay and Scott, we have just barely scratched the surface of this conversation, and I hate it that the time has gone by so quickly.
I say hour number 2.
There you
go. What I love about representing Paducah Cooperative Ministry is it is a really excellent vehicle, I think, to bring people together from all different denominations in that one unified opportunity to work together, to talk together in dialogue on reflections and out in the community. And I'm just so grateful we got started on this conversation.
And to help people. We funnel our efforts together.
Right,
and
we do so much more
Absolutely,
when we work together and we talk together, and I think that's the beauty. And I honestly think that's when God smiles, when he sees us all playing nicely together and starting to talk and to share ideas back and forth and beliefs back and forth. And I think he smiles at us and he says, okay, good job, kids. But anyway, we thank you all for joining us today on Reflections, and we're sorry that we didn't get deeper into the conversation, but I hope that Brandt and Jay, you will come back and join Scott and I, and we'll continue this conversation.
Absolutely.
And all of us are in ministry, and we're all here to do God's work with our human hands. And thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks.